The fruit of the Spirit is one of the most peaceful passages in the New Testament, but read the lines around it and the atmosphere changes completely. Paul warns believers that they may bite, devour, provoke, and envy one another. Why would he place love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control inside a passage filled with rivalry and mutual destruction? Many readers treat these 9 qualities as a private spiritual checklist, but the surrounding argument suggests that Paul is addressing something much more concrete. To understand the list, we need to follow his argument from Christian freedom through community conflict and into his instructions about gentle restoration and carrying one another's burdens. We usually encounter the fruit of the Spirit on its own, on a poster, in a devotional, or as a list to memorize. There is nothing wrong with remembering the words, but when the list is separated from its setting, the question that gives it force disappears. What was Paul discussing before he named the fruit? And what does he say immediately afterward? The answer begins not with fruit, but with freedom. In Galatians 5, Paul tells the believers, "You are called to freedom." That sounds like a beginning of a celebration, but he immediately adds a warning. Do not use that freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. Christian freedom, in Paul's argument, is not permission to place the self at the center. It creates a surprising responsibility. Paul tells them to serve one another through love. The language is strong. The verb belongs to the vocabulary of servitude. Paul is not endorsing slavery. He's creating a deliberate reversal. Those who have been set free are to place themselves at one another's service. Then he quotes the command from Leviticus, "Love your neighbor as yourself." So the issue is already relational. Paul is asking what freedom will produce between people. Will it become self-indulgence, or will it become loving service? Then comes the strange warning. If you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. The sentence is conditional. Paul does not describe one documented physical fight, and he's not speaking about literal biting. He uses predatory language to picture mutually destructive behavior. The image is severe because the danger is severe. A community can speak the language of freedom while using that freedom to compete, wound, and consume. The immediate contrast is between 2 ways of using freedom: serving one another through love or turning freedom into an opportunity for the flesh. That raises the next question. Why does Paul answer this danger by talking about walking by the Spirit? Paul continues, "Walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." He describes the flesh and the Spirit as opposed to one another. This conflict is personal. It involves desire, decision, and conduct within individual believers. Paul is not ignoring the inner life, but when he names the works of the flesh, something important happens. The list includes sexual sins. It includes idolatry and sorcery. It includes drunkenness and excess. We should not pretend the entire list is about relationships inside the church. Yet in the middle of that list, Paul gathers a striking concentration of behaviors that tear relationships apart: enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy. This group develops the warning we have just heard. Biting and devouring now takes the form of hostility, rivalry, anger, division, and resentment. In this list, the effects of the flesh do not remain hidden inside one person. They also take social form. They create competing sides. They turn disagreement into rivalry and another person's success into a reason for envy. The passage doesn't say every Galatian conflict came from one cause. The wider letter is clearly concerned with circumcision, law observance, and the treatment of Jewish and Gentile believers. Those disputes likely formed part of the background. But Galatians 5 doesn't identify the exact cause of every act of jealousy, anger, or division. That uncertainty matters. We should not claim more history than the text gives us. What the passage does give us is a pattern. When freedom becomes an opportunity for the flesh, destructive desires become destructive relationships. Only after Paul has described that pattern does he say, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. The contrast is immediate. Paul does not call these the achievements of disciplined people. He calls them the fruit of the Spirit. The Spirit is the source. That does not make believers passive. Paul has already told them to walk by the Spirit, and he will soon tell them to keep in step with the Spirit. But the life he describes is not manufactured by willpower alone. And in this context, the list looks different. Love stands against enmity. Peace stands against strife. Patience stands against fits of anger. Gentleness stands against provocation. Self-control stands against destructive desire. These contrasts are helpful, but they are not exact one-to-one pairs. Paul does not tell us that each quality was designed as the direct opposite of one specific work of the flesh. The larger contrast is clearer. The flesh produces conduct that fractures people. The Spirit produces character that changes how people live with one another. Every quality is personal, but none remains merely private. Love must have someone to love. Patience appears when another person tests it. Kindness becomes visible in action. Gentleness matters when power could be used harshly. Self-control matters when anger, envy, or desire offers an easier response. Paul uses the singular word fruit. That may reinforce the unity of the Spirit's work, but the grammar alone does not prove that all 9 qualities always develop equally, or that they must be treated as 9 indivisible parts of one object. Then Paul adds, "Against such things there is no law." His immediate point is modest and clear. No law stands against this Spirit-produced conduct. Still, one important question remains. Have we moved too far from the individual believer? Is the fruit of the Spirit mainly about the church as a group rather than personal character? The individual interpretation is not a mistake. Paul speaks about desires within people. He commands believers to walk by the Spirit. He names self-control. And in verse 24, he says that those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. That is deeply personal language. The Spirit transforms individuals. A community cannot become loving, peaceful, patient, or gentle unless actual people are being changed. But the individual reading becomes incomplete when it treats the fruit as only a private report card. The repeated language of the passage keeps moving outward. Serve one another, bite and consume one another, provoke or compete against one another, envy one another, and then bear one another's burdens. Paul is concerned with what happens within believers and what happens between believers. So the strongest responsible conclusion is not individual instead of communal, or communal instead of individual. It is personal transformation expressed relationally. The wider controversy in Galatians helps explain why this mattered. Paul has already described Peter withdrawing from table fellowship with Gentile believers. He has argued against requiring circumcision. He later warns about people who want to boast in the flesh of others. Those details show that questions of theology, status, and belonging had real consequences for Christian fellowship. But we still need to be careful. The text does not say that every conflict in Galatians 5 was caused by the circumcision teachers. That may be part of the setting, but it is not an explicit explanation of every tension Paul names. The strongest evidence now comes from what Paul says after the fruit. If the fruit is Spirit-produced personal character expressed in relationships, the following verses should show that character in action. And they do. Paul says, "If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit." There are 2 sides to that sentence. Life by the Spirit is the reality Paul assumes. Keeping in step is the conduct he commands. The phrase can responsibly be understood as aligning one's conduct with the Spirit. It can suggest proceeding in line or order,
But the text does not require us to build the explanation around one exact military or marching image. Then Paul names what threatens that alignment. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Translations vary slightly. The middle word can be rendered provoking, challenging, or competing against one another. We do not need to force one narrow picture. In context, it describes status-driven behavior that draws others into rivalry. The sequence appears to sketch a pattern. Conceit centers the self. Provocation turns that self-importance outward. Envy resents the position or advantage of another person. This warning is not detached from the fruit. It returns to the same relational danger Paul introduced before the list. Serve one another. Do not consume one another. Do not provoke one another. Do not envy one another. Then the chapter ends, but the argument continues. Galatians 6 begins with a person caught in wrongdoing. Now Paul gives the community a concrete test. How should people who claim to live by the Spirit respond when someone else has failed? Paul addresses you who are spiritual and tells them to restore that person in a spirit of gentleness. Gentleness has just appeared in the fruit of the Spirit. That connection matters. Paul does not leave gentleness as an abstract quality. He shows what it looks like when another person's wrongdoing creates a difficult situation. Restoration does not mean pretending nothing happened. The person is caught in wrongdoing, and restoration is needed. But the goal is not humiliation, superiority, or destruction. It's repair. And Paul warns each restorer to watch himself, because the person helping is also vulnerable to temptation. That detail blocks spiritual pride. The one who restores cannot stand above the fallen person as though failure belongs only to other people. Then Paul adds, bear one another's burdens. The contrast is now concrete. A flesh-driven response can use another person's weakness to compete, condemn, or crush. The Spirit produces gentleness strong enough to restore and love willing to carry weight. This is where the fruit stops being a familiar list and becomes a way of life between people. So why does Paul place the fruit of the Spirit between warnings about believers biting, devouring, provoking, and envying one another? Scripture explicitly shows that the fruit is surrounded by relational commands and warnings. Before the list, Christian freedom must become loving service rather than mutual destruction. Within the works of the flesh, Paul names hostility, jealousy, anger, selfish ambition, dissension, faction, and envy. After the list, he warns against conceit, provocation, and envy. Then he moves into gentle restoration and burden-bearing. The placement strongly suggests that the fruit is central to Paul's answer to flesh-driven breakdown within Christian relationships. But some things remain uncertain. Paul does not describe one identifiable church fight. He does not tell us that every conflict arose from the circumcision controversy. And he does not reduce the fruit of the Spirit to conflict management. The fruit still describes personal character. The conflict between flesh and spirit still reaches into individual desires. Self-control still matters within the person, but personal character is tested in relationship. This video demonstrates that Paul's fruit of the Spirit is not an isolated personality checklist, but within Galatians 5:13 through 6:2, the Spirit-produced character that stands against flesh-driven rivalry and enables believers to serve, restore, and bear with one another in love. In plain language, the fruit appears inside this conflict-filled argument because Spirit-produced character is what keeps Christian freedom from collapsing into rivalry and mutual destruction. Freedom can become self-service, or it can become loving service. Failure can become an opportunity for humiliation or an occasion for gentle restoration. Another person's burden can remain something we judge from a distance or become something we help carry. That's why the surrounding verses matter. The fruit of the Spirit is often used as a private checklist. Am I loving? Am I patient? Am I self-controlled? Those questions are not useless. Paul does care about the person we are becoming.
But the context adds more demanding questions. What does my freedom produce around other people? When disagreement comes, do I serve or compete? When someone else succeeds, do I celebrate or envy? When someone fails, do I restore or expose? When another person carries a heavy burden, do I help carry it? This does not mean that every disagreement proves someone is walking in the flesh. Paul himself confronts serious error in Galatians. Truth matters. Accountability matters. Wrongdoing is still called wrongdoing. The issue is not whether Christians ever correct, confront, or disagree. The issue is the character they display while doing it. Gentleness is not the absence of truth. It is the manner of someone who knows he can also be tempted. Patience is not passivity. It is the refusal to let frustration become destruction. Self-control is not silence in the face of error. It is the refusal to let anger, pride, or rivalry take command. Love is not vague warmth. In Galatians 5, it means using freedom to serve another person. Paul's arrangement moves the fruit out of the world of slogans and into the pressure of real relationships. It is easy to admire peace when no one is provoking us. It is easy to praise gentleness when no one has failed badly. It is easy to speak about love when love costs nothing. But the fruit becomes visible when believers face rivalry, envy, wrongdoing, and burdens without allowing the flesh to govern their response. The opposite of devouring one another is not merely avoiding conflict. It is becoming the kind of people who can restore one another and carry one another's burdens.